Morning, morning. Let's talk about toilets. So there is a new policy that the government are trying to bring in that would make it mandatory for certain buildings, certain businesses to have two gender segregated toilets rather than a single gender neutral facility. Now, I don't like this policy because it wouldn't work particularly well for the area I represent. So for Moordown, we've got our stretch of Wimborne Road that runs through. We've got little shops and cafes and restaurants along there. A lot of them, they've just got one single toilet, it's just basin and a toilet. If they have a major refit and or the building changes hands or whatever, and this legislation goes through, it would mean whoever runs that place has got to use double the amount of space now to put in a second toilet. And I mean, actually, running a small business is hard enough. Why are we making things any harder for them? Solving a problem that doesn't exist and writing policy for headlines. And if I'm honest, gender segregated toilets, I think, are probably something future generations in a few years will look on the same way we look on outside toilets as oh my God, do we really used to do that? For me as a parent, I much prefer the gender neutral toilets. I've got two girls we adopted a few years ago. When we take them out, sometimes the gents who take them to our local pub is horrible. They don't want to go in there. They don't want to go in the disabled because an old lady banged on the door angrily when we were using that together last time. So instead, they insist, Dad, you've got to take us to the ladies, all of that. And so I'll do that begrudgingly. Apparently, doing that makes me an awful human being. But no, I don't like gender segregated toilets. I think if you look at decent design for a school, actually the open plan toilet seems the right way to do things. For anything else, as a kid who was bullied an awful lot at school, I tell you, toilets and buses, get those sorted out. I tell you what, people like me would have maybe been able to learn GCSE French or whatever. The toilets where you've just got a single room, with toilet and wash basin in there that you go into on your own, you lock the door, and then you come out and it opens onto a corridor. Bang on. That is how toilets should be designed for schools. But this debate is really toxic. There's an awful lot of name calling and whatnot, and it makes it really hard. So there's a Twitter account I follow that actually asked a couple of interesting questions of the PCCs coming up, elections when they were coming up. One of them was about strip searches or whatever, and I was curious to see what they were going to ask me next. And so I was a bit frustrated when I saw they'd taken what I'd said about, oh, actually, I think as a parent, it's fine to take your children into the toilet that doesn't match your gender for them to use that toilet. I don't, but that is a problem with toilets, gender toilets in general. To this, I'd said men should be able to use women's toilets. Well, that's a nonsense. Why misrepresent what I'm saying? If you're a campaigning organisation that wants to ensure, everybody who is transphobic knows who the most transphobic candidate is to vote for, you're not going to have a problem painting me as somebody they shouldn't vote for. I've worn my Protect Trans Kids t-shirt to the last three council meetings. I will give you enough ammunition. Just hold on. I probably will in this video. But actually, I myself used to be quite transphobic. So when I was 17, just about old enough to get into the pub, I had the beard coming on so I could get away with getting served and whatnot. I had a friend, so they were born female, designated female at birth or whatever, but they went by a male name. That's how they introduced themselves to us. And I think they may have asked for us to use male pronouns with them. I can't remember, but I was an arsehole when I was 17, wasn't pleasant at all, didn't respect that request, and was quite condescending, dismissive, and questioning and belittling towards this person. And I want to make it clear, I was not a nice 17-year-old. This wasn't particularly because they were trans. I was nasty to everybody. But I was able to be extra nasty to them because they were trans and because there was almost a righteousness to it, because you're just saying what's true and whatnot. Now, I've grown out of that behaviour now, and actually, I think all of us are probably more prejudiced than we'd like to think, even now. And I frequently look back on how I've acted in the past and have to go, oh, actually, yeah, that is a time when your unconscious bias or prejudices lead you to make the wrong call. And I think actually, if you're not able to look back on your recent kind of history and actions and identify moments when you have been impacted by prejudice and making prejudice calls about somebody, you're not growing very much as a person. I think we all have a whole ton of unconscious bias we need to unpack. But I've definitely seen that almost questioning the authenticity of someone's identity. I've seen that a few times, but the time that really stands out to me is when we just finished going through the adoptive process. Girls hadn't been home long, and so one of my wife's cousins comes around, and her little boy asks our oldest girl, "Who's your real dad?" So understands that our kids are adopted, and so curious. Well, who's the proper dad? Must be a really uncomfortable question to try and answer as a newly adopted kid with a strange forever family who you don't really know or even like. So I was like, no, that's me, and he still wouldn't let it drop. He's like, no, 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 but before you, because do you know? I know you, mate. I've met you. You didn't always have a kid. This is a new thing. Who was the dad before you? Who was the proper one? Now, there was no real malice or kind of spite in the way this was being done. It was genuinely innocently asking, no, what's the proper one? What's the authentic one? And I think we do have a kind of innate knowledge of once we start learning about the world as to what the proper thing is and all of that, and we want to know that. And you can see that attitude of wanting to know what the proper one is. Who's the real one? What's your real gender? And all of that. That question almost comes from the same place. But I tell you what, if you like podcasts, I like podcasts. One of my favorite ones is No Such Thing as a Fish. Now that podcast is named for a biologist, Stephen Gould. And his point was, I mean, he wasn't an idiot. He didn't study like the oceans for years and just go, oh, no fish in there, mate. Don't know what you're on about. His feeling was that that classification of fish was too broad to be useful. That if you had a definition that included all of the things that we would consider to be fish, it would include almost everything. And then if you had any kind of more rigorous scientific definition of what a fish was, where you started to draw the line at particular places, you would find that you begin to exclude things that we consider fish, and that it was a meaningless concept for anybody who was particularly interested in the topic. And I'm going to be frank, I think the same is true of man and woman and sexes. And I'm going to be really clear here. I don't just mean gender, I mean sex. I mean the scientific thing. If you want to talk about, oh, we can define a man and a woman by biology and it should just be biology, I think once you start paying attention to biology, you realize that's not particularly possible. What about hormone levels? What about chromosomes? And what about intersex people? Those people exist. We can't just pretend that they don't. And there is a sliding scale. It's very hard to answer that question. But from a practical point of view, in some respects, we have to try. We have to come up with a practical working definition. If I go and try and get a portion of fish and chips, I do not expect to be served up a fried rat and be told, well, actually, I think you'll find the biologist Stephen Gould said there's no such thing as a fish anyway, so I might as well deep fry a rat and give it to you. So yeah, talking practicalities, one question I've been asked is why do you support men in women's prisons? And obviously they don't mean that. They're not going, why do you think there should be like male correctional officers working in a women's prison? That's not their question. What they mean is trans women, but they've decided to say men instead of trans women just to be needlessly inflammatory and aggy. And I'm going to be honest, I can be quite aggy and combative in a lot of situations, but I try not to be. I recognise that a debate isn't helped by that attitude, but I think this debate, really, most people, they've got an ideology that tells them how it should be. They're going to state everything that makes clear what their ideology is and also winds up the other side. And somehow, if they approach a situation like that, we'll have a good situation, a good outcome. Obviously, I don't think that that's the case. So I'm going to try and make an honest attempt of answering that question. And I think actually, if you look at our prisons and you go, oh, the problem that needs to be sorted out first and foremost is how we're treating the gender segregation of our trans prisoners, I think you need your head looking at, because our prisons are overcrowded and broken. Our prisons are currently essentially just universities for criminals, you know. So you go in with your A level in twocking and shoplifting, and you come out with your kind of friends for life in the industry that you're going to move into. You've done all of your networking there in prison, and then on top of that, you've now got a BA in armed robbery with a master's in drug trafficking and distribution. That's how our prisons function at the moment. There is a massive problem with violence and sexual violence within our prisons, and the root cause of that is not simply the presence of trans prisoners in those populations, because frankly, it happens, you know, without those trans prisoners being involved. It happens just in the cis prison population, including the female cis prison population. It needs to be addressed. It's a serious problem. But if you think the solution is either to put all of the trans prisoners in their designated at birth gender category, or conversely to put all of the trans prisoners in the gender category of their stated gender, you're just wrong. It's not going to be that simple. There will be a complex and nuanced approach that we have to take to this problem, just like there is actually a complex and nuanced approach we have to take to all of our prisoners to get them reformed and protect society and release them in a way that's productive and safe and all of that. Anybody who tells you they know what best practice is at the moment is lying, because it's not been established. I mean, same's true for medicine. You know, we just don't know what works yet. There has not been enough research and enough studies for anybody to be absolutely confident. I think we have got some steers. We can see what works. Now, actually, we also have to listen to people themselves about what works for them and what worked for them. But I don't think we can also be naive about the fact that there is a pharmaceutical industry, there is a medical industrial complex that looks to promote needless medical care. I mean, Ivan Illich's concept of iatrogenesis, I'm probably saying the Greek wrong, is a valid critique of our medical system still today. We don't know how to do CPR properly. You know, if you ask a paramedic in this country how to do CPR, and you ask a paramedic in Germany and a paramedic in America, you will get three different answers, because even with something as kind of vital and long established as that, we don't know what the answer is, you know. So I think it's a slightly different rate between Germany and England, but I might be wrong. And I'm fairly certain if you do CPR in America, you check for the wallet first. So it's different everywhere. We don't know what works best for a lot of these things yet. And actually, if we're going to establish it, it's going to take very dull, boring conversations about double-blind trials that shouldn't be politicized. So this is a really big topic, and I ideally want to try and do one short 5-minute video every week, and instead I've spent almost 2 weeks now doing what's probably going to be best part of 30 minutes on this topic. As you can see, I've had an outfit change. It's been going on for so long. So I'm going to try and come to a conclusion here. So there's a straightforward question. What is a woman, you know, or are trans men men and whatnot? Now, that question, much as people seem to think it's really important, public figures answer it and whatnot, and it's talked about in the press and in politics, to me it's a dull question. It is a tautological question. It answers itself. It's like the question, are dogs mammals, or do mammals lay eggs? You know, it's true based on the way we've defined all of those terms in the question we're asking. The answer's predetermined. To me, that's a meaningless question. I think all of those concepts, you know, mammal, dog, egg, they're all social constructions. They're not kind of eternal truths we've stumbled over like mathematical truths. They're ones we've created together. So like I say, I'd subscribe to Berger and Luckman's idea on the social construction of reality, and that kind of tautological philosophy doesn't have any real world implications. It's not interesting. It's not worth considering. And if questions like what is a woman, are trans women women, are trans men men, are questions you think are relevant in a policy kind of context, I think you're just straightforwardly wrong. Those questions are no more meaningful or useful than asking, are adoptive parents real parents? The authenticity or the realness of somebody's membership into that kind of big overarching group doesn't particularly matter. You can't lump people together in those big homogenous groups from a policy point of view. It's just not practical. You can no more lump all women together than you can lump all children or all men together or all people together. Asking that kind of question is like asking, is the pawn an attacking or a defensive piece when you come to analyze how you should play a game of chess? That that question within it, in the pre-analytic vision you have to ask such a question, you've got to make a gross oversimplification of how chess works, where you miss kind of the fundamentals of the game itself. No grandmaster thinks of a chess as a pawn as either a defensive or an offensive piece. The game's not that simple, not when you understand it and you play it well. Similarly, there's just like there's no such thing as a fish from a policy point of view, there's nothing as simple as just a woman, a man, a child. You have to think of so many more factors. Really, though, that question, are trans women women, are trans men men, isn't asked as a philosophical question or as a policy question. What you're really being asked whenever you're asked that question, or whenever you hear somebody answer that question, what's being discussed is, should we question the authenticity and indeed the very humanity of trans people, or instead, should we be allies, recognise that trans people exist and deserve to be treated with the same amount of decency and respect as anyone else? It's that simple. That's what's up for discussion there whenever you hear those topics being discussed. And from my point of view, believe in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So I want to treat trans people with respect, and I think everybody should do the same. I try to think of trans women as women, trans men as men. I get things wrong all the time because I'm fallible, but I try my best to do better every time subsequently. And that's it. That's my conclusion. That's how I think we should all be. That's the end of that debate about are trans women women and trans men men. I think there are much more complicated debates when it comes to how we deliver various policies, but really I think they probably sit underneath bigger meta debates about how we organise our economy and our society. If there was going to be one final PS, it would be, if you've listened to everything I've got to say today and you're still thinking, okay, that's all well and good, but what about insert whatever your chosen moral panic is about trans people existing or the idea of there being trans kids? If that's your concern, I think you would do well to remember how politics and public discourse was in the 80s and 90s around gay people. And if you can't see the parallels here to what was happening then you are blind to what's going on at the moment. I mean, we've got legislation around banning sex education for children under a certain age, all dressed up as protecting the innocence of children and protecting them from the horrors of gender ideology and whatever else. I tell you what, there's nothing more dangerous for our children for them to be denied knowledge of this stuff. I think every household should have My Underpants Ruling as a book, and Some Secrets Should Never Be Kept, for example. I think that's really important for us to be teaching our children from a young age. Anyway, as ever, there's going to be a link to my crowdfunder in the description if you want to support my campaign for election to Parliament to represent Bournemouth East. I don't just need money though, we also run on volunteers. We don't have paid staff positions here in the region for the Southwest, and it's been really touching that some people have got in touch, not just volunteering to deliver leaflets, but with relevant skills to running this kind of campaign. And frankly, that's how we're going to win this thing, by all of us pulling together and getting rid of the corrupt political establishment we've been stuck with for so long.